Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We sure hope you let us know where you think we got it right and where we completely missed the point, which you can do by going to unsilentpodcast.com, Rumble, and a variety of other social channels. So let's get into it. Brian, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, I thought you had a topic. You had a whole thing ready to go. Yeah, let's see what you got today.
I do. So here's the question. Is it possible, with all of the dysfunction in this country right now, have we really lost the American spirit? And what is the American spirit? Have we lost it? And what is it? So let me start with this question right here. It's a question.
Good thing you have followed, because this was going to be the shortest podcast we ever did. I was going to say yes, that'd be the end of it.
We're done. Okay. Nice of you. Follow us on Rumble. Leave some comments.
Right.
Here's a question that somebody else posed, and we were just talking about this. So, well, you already knew the answer to this anyway. So now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any other nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. And who was that, Brian?
Was Abraham Lincoln, of course.
Abraham Lincoln, yeah, one of the greatest orators of all time. Some people don't like him because he suspended habeas corpus, but that's another episode altogether. So He was asking the question whether a nation conceived in liberty and dedicated to the principles of freedom can long endure. That was an open question at the time of the Civil War. That was one of the great crisis eras. That was two great crisis eras prior to now. So the last one, of course, was World War II, and the previous one, where the U.S. was in an existential threat situation, was the Civil War. And so in each of those situations, the question was, are we even going to survive this thing?
Right. Which,
so I think that's an open question
from his perspective, like, we went through the great cataclysm of becoming a nation, the Revolutionary War.
Yes.
And then boom, 80 years later or so, they're in the throes of now the Civil War.
Right.
And we didn't have a history like you and I talk about the cycles that is happening every 80 to 100 years, that we didn't have that history. This was the first time, and they're like, we didn't even make it 100 years. The whole thing's going to fall apart.
Yes, exactly.
And you and I had the benefit of hindsight to seeing, okay, well, we made through the Civil War, and great things came from that. And then we went through the Great Depression and World War II about 80 years later, and some pretty good things came out of that. And then now we're due. And if you go backwards in time from the Revolutionary War, it goes backwards in time, centuries, about every 80 to 100 years. So you and I have the benefit of perspective to see that this is just the metronome that we operate within.
Yeah.
He didn't have that. I mean, they're like, holy crap, we made it 7 years and the whole thing's coming apart.
And it's all falling apart around us. Well, and it was a real question in particular then, because it was there's been republics before. There was the Roman Republic. There was a variety of different republics before, but there wasn't a nation that was so dedicated to these principles of individual liberty and individual sovereignty that had really existed for any time, any significant period of time in the past. So that was an open question. And now that it's a different question now, but I think a lot of folks are asking that question: is that spirit that created that kind of country, that kind of, we're thought of as an experiment, as a type of government, is that coming to an end now, or does it exist now? Now, we've been challenged on that a number of times. We've been challenged on that at 9/11. A lot of people thought, well, that was going to be potentially the end as we confront, terrorism around the world and on 9/11 here at home. So that it's come up again, and that was sort of the beginning of this period, I think, to a great extent, at least.
Yeah. Well, I think, you kind of alluded to it earlier. It is the spirit of America gone? Obviously there's tons of nuance there, and I really think it depends on what age cohort you look at. For example,
sure,
guys, your age, my age, and older probably are looking at this like, we better fix some stuff or we're going to lose it. Some version of that. And people my kids' age in their 20s or whatever, um, probably have a perspective like either it can't be lost because we've never known any kind of they're too young to understand what it was like when 9/11 happened.
Sure.
That they're they know of the Great Recession in 2007 to 2009. They know of
Right.
that, but they were too young to really have any kind of hardship of that. So from their perspective, they might be wondering like, what's all the hubbub about? Like, okay, so like, what's it mean for them? All they know is the rent's too expensive, the groceries are too expensive, but they've not ever gone through a period as adults where they didn't have a job or didn't have
Yeah.
an abundance of jobs to choose from or whatever. So
Right.
from their perspective, they're probably wondering what you and I are bitching about all the time, honestly, right?
Well, and I wonder, I wonder, I grew up in a patriotic household, right? I mean,
Yeah.
so it's my dad's 96th birthday today. So my
Oh,
dad
well, tell
was,
your dad I said happy birthday.
I'll let him know. I'll let him know. I'll tell him about the podcast. He doesn't know what podcasts are, but I'm sure he'll be impressed.
Yeah.
But you think about sort of that feeling of patriotism and maybe it is an age. I don't think that patriotism is an age thing because I think there's always been people that believed in the notion of this country and believed in the sort of ideal of what it means to be an American. But I wonder, is it possible that that is lost now? Is it possible that that's sort of passé? I mean, we've got a
I
lot of
think
people
that
complaining
not
about it.
only is it passe, I think that the reason you and I had a belief of patriotism growing up is because we were taught that at home and in school.
Sure,
Uh, I think that my kids were exposed to that at home.
right,
They were not taught that at school at
right,
all. I was literally taught like side by side comparisons between capitalism and communism. I know my kids didn't get that.
right,
I was I was exposed to horrific things that we've gone through in our country and victims of, you know, evil acts and evil people even.
right.
And I was also shown how we emerged from that and became better because of that. I know my kids did not get the second half of that explanation. They
Sure,
got the explanation of all the things we did wrong, and they did not get they were not exposed to. And here's how we were better at the end of all that.
sure,
And while these things were horrific and these unspeakable acts of evil happen, at least we got better in this area. And I'm not saying that it was worth it necessarily, even, but we as a country got better because that part is absolutely left out of the education system now.
sure. Well, so is it just a matter of education, or is there something more to it? And that's an honest question. I don't know the answer to that. I mean, when I think of patriotism, and when I think of the spirit of America as compared to every country, people are proud of their country. I mean, I think there's plenty of
Yeah,
Russians that are proud of Russia, and I think there's
yeah.
plenty of people that are proud of
I know plenty
wherever
of
they
people
live.
from Mexico that if you say they're Hispanic, they want to throat punch you and say, "I'm Mexican. I'm very
Right.
proud of being from Mexico."
Yeah, and I think that's probably true in every country. So I think there's a certain amount of baked in sort of pride of where you are and of who
Yeah,
you are in the world. I think that I don't know that in every country you go around and I mean, you've got a flag behind you. I got a flag behind me. I don't know that people in a lot of other countries have this kind of overt. And again, I could be wrong. I don't know. Maybe somebody will tell us we're wrong. I've
yeah.
been to a number of countries, but I haven't seen maybe France. Maybe the French are. I don't know.
I think it's selective, maybe more. For example, when I see soccer matches in Europe, it's full of flags of whatever
Sure.
countries are playing, and when I
Yep.
see those kind of sporting events, there's patriotism. I don't know if people in Mexico have Mexican flags hanging on their walls the way that we do here. I don't
Yeah.
know if you drive through certain neighborhoods in Chile and see the Chilean flag on a mast on some houses or whatever. I don't. I mean,
Right.
imagine you see them in government buildings everywhere, but how much people are devoted to that on their own? I don't know. I'm gonna guess that Germany didn't have a whole lot of that through the 40s, 50s, and 60s after World War
Yeah.
II.
Probably
I'm
not.
gonna guess Japan didn't have. They probably had a lot of shame and embarrassment,
Yeah.
So I think that ebbs and flows. I would think. I don't know. I do know that, like, for looking at it again from a 20-something-year-old's perspective, it's not it's seen. I don't know if the word is not permissible, if that's the way to say it. It's seen
Well, it's
as
not cool.
inappropriate.
Yeah.
Well, it depends. It depends on who your friends are. Like, one of our kids, he only hangs with people who it would be not cool to say that you're not proud to be an American.
Yeah.
I think it depends for sure, like everything in the world, of course. But I guess what I'm getting at is you can't be exposed to it's just common knowledge. You would have to be really sheltered to not be aware of the border situation right now.
Sure.
And you can't be proud of something you're not interested in protecting, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So even if we said things like we're patriotic, and we said things like we care about our country, and we said things like we're proud of our heritage or our country's progression, which nobody is saying those last two things, by the way. Nobody is saying we're proud of our heritage, and nobody's saying that
Right.
they're proud of our progression. They
Right.
were saying that when I was in school. Like, again,
Sure.
we went through
Absolutely. Yeah.
bad things, but we still emerged, and we were better because of it. That stuff is not happening. But even if you were, you can't say that stuff and have anybody have an expectation that kids are going to believe it when you're not willing to protect the thing that you say is so great. So I think that I would imagine they're just like, you guys are all just nuts.
Well, so okay. Speaking of that, I have a little video, a snippet of a video I want to
All
show, and
right.
let's talk about what just about 15, 20 seconds. So not terribly long, but and this was a concert that Charlie Daniels Band did a couple of weeks after 9/11. So we're talking, 23 years ago now.
23 years, yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to believe it's so long. Um, and they have an expression of what it means to be an American, and and basically what the song, of course, came out in I think it was like the 80s, and the sort of antagonist in the song then was the Soviet Union. That was,
Yeah.
And
Right.
in 9/11, it wasn't the Soviet Union anymore, but it was the principle is the same, that, hey, we're all Americans. In fact, the name of the song is In America. This is an official
Yeah.
Charlie Daniels Band song. So I'm just going to play.
I'm going to guess that came out in 1977. I don't know, but I'm going to guess 1977.
All right. Well, if there's a prize and it's then, you win it, but there's no prize.
Okay.
So
All right.
we'll
Well, I'm going to look it
we'll
up
do
then.
this and then take a look at it and talk about it for a moment.
From the sound up in Long Island, out to San Francisco Bay, and everything that's in between them is our home. Now we may have done just a little bit of fighting amongst ourselves, but you outside people just best leave us alone. Cause we'll all stick together, and you take that to the bank. That's the cowboys and the hippies, and the rebels and the Yanks. You just go and lay your hand on a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and I think you're gonna find they understand.
So the question is that spirit, the we'll all stick together, and you can take that to the bank, whether it's the cowboys or the hippies or the rebels or the Yanks. We've done a little bit of fighting amongst ourselves,
Yep.
but you outside people best leave us alone. Is
Right.
that to me, that to me is a spirit of a family. That's a kind of a family statement. It's like, yeah, my uncle might be crazy, and I can call him crazy, but if you call him crazy, I'm gonna punch you in the nose.
Yeah, that's my uncle.
It's my exactly.
You don't mess with my uncle. Like, yeah, you're 100% right. That is we were, so I looked up, that song came out in 1980, so I was wrong. You were right.
Okay, no prize.
No prize. So I look at all this stuff kind of like a family, right? Like you said, like we can have the weird aunt you only see at Christmas who has the crazy ideas and what the conspiracy theories or the wackadoodle ideas or whatever. Fine, okay, that she's still my aunt, and somebody else makes fun of her, like you said, like, you don't get to do that. That's my people,
Right. Yeah.
because by making fun of my aunt, you're kind of making fun of me, right?
Right.
And what I see now is not that we're not a family. It's not even like I would, some people would be embarrassed that you and I, for example, were relatives or something. It's not even that. It's that you and I must be eradicated, not even like from the family, but just like
Yeah.
period. And that is just off the charts different than anything I've experienced before. So it's not
Yeah.
even, again, I go back to the example of the Iranian Revolution where the mother put the noose over her own son's neck.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is what we are experiencing now from some. Now, again, you and I are still guys like you and I don't mean guys like men, people like you and I are still hanging on to these ideas. Like, I may disagree with you, but I'll fight to the death your
Right.
ability to say what you want to say. And I think that there's a dwindling number of people who are hanging on to that stuff for sure.
Well, see, there's my question. That is my question. I don't know if I believe that or not. I mean, I certainly see what your point is, but I don't know if I believe in this. This is an open question for me. Whether the bulk of people who are just going about their lives, who are just, going to work and they're in the unions or they're a school teacher or they're a plumber or an electrician or whatever they're doing. I don't know if the bulk of those people would look at this and say, yeah, that's what it means to be an American. And yeah, there's the people on my side and there's the AOCs of the world. And we disagree wholeheartedly. And, but she's my nut burger, not yours. So leave her alone.
Yeah.
I don't, so here's my proposition with that. We've had times, we've had riots in this country during, the last 10, 15 years. But there were also in the 60s, they're burning down cities in the 60s too. There were some pretty heavy duty riots in the 60s, but yet we came together against a common enemy in the Soviet Union. For the bulk of my, early life, we did that for, we were talking before we started, but 2, 3, 4, 5 years after 9/11. And then we get to fighting amongst ourselves again. And so is it that, is this time all that much different? And I'm the aspirational part of me, says that we will in the end come together again like we have before, like you did. I mean, in the Civil War, we're killing each other. 600,000 people killing each other, but we came together afterwards, right? So
I have zero doubt that 7 years from now we will be as united as we've ever been. What I'm not sure about is we'll be united as a socialist or communist country, or we'll be united as a country that you and I would recognize. I don't know that. I do believe we'll be united because these things do happen in spurts, and there's a victor, and there's people who win, and those people get to write history. I think you said two crucial things that explain part of the waning amount of American spirit or patriotism or whatever you want to call it, which is when in the 60s we had a enemy, which was communism.
Yes.
It was less than 20 years prior to the 60s when all those riots were happening that people were very well aware that tens of millions of people had been killed in the name of communism.
Yep.
Now, if you were to ask your average 22-year-old kid today or 25-year-old kid today, how many people were killed because of communism and how long ago was it?
Sure.
I don't know. I have no mathematical way to back this up, but my hunch is most of them would have no idea the scale in which it happened. None of them would attribute the actual deaths that were due to communism to communism.
Yep.
And they would think it was like a land far, like Star Wars, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Far away, yeah.
I don't. So in the 60s, even though, we had some real infighting amongst ourselves, but relative to the calamitous deaths that were happening on the scale they were happening, our infighting seemed pretty minor.
Yeah.
And the much greater foe was these communist people who would say really flowery, lovely things, but they were completely a wolf in sheep's clothing. And everybody knew that because we had perspective. It was not hidden. It was reported on, and it was grotesque, and you couldn't get away from it. Like everybody knew. And then same thing, fast forwarding to, I think your other example was 9/11 or that was, again, this was one of those moments where it was 23 years ago. I could tell you exactly what my morning was like that morning.
Yeah,
It
I
was a
could too.
random Tuesday.
Yep.
There's the Tuesday before that and the Tuesday after that. Couldn't tell you what was happening. I know my exact morning routine.
Yep.
By the quarter hour that entire morning until about noon our time.
Yeah.
That was meaningful, and it was like,
Yeah.
holy shit, these people are coming to hurt us, and
Yep.
we better put our tiffs aside because we got a much bigger problem. And I think that much bigger problem is a piece that's missing today is the kids don't have kids. Like I'm not like that old, but the
Okay,
kids
Pops.
don't have the kids don't have that much bigger problem for perspective. All they know is what they've been told by teachers and peers and the news and TikTok and all these things, is that guys like you and I are the problem.
Well, and so I think they don't have a national much bigger problem. They've got much bigger problems that don't unite us as a nation, but divide us as a nation. In other words, so like the much bigger problem would be like global warming, right? And and we're uniquely guilty. And in fact, it's a divisive problem. We're uniquely guilty because we have the most cars and all this stuff.
Same with slavery. We're uniquely guilty because from their perspective, nobody else did that. It was
Right.
like us in England invented that, like a couple hundred years ago. Like
exactly.
And we laugh, but I would be willing to bet a substantial amount of money if you asked 10,000 18-year-old kids who invented slavery, they would either say England or the United States.
Yeah, no, you're right. They wouldn't realize that it was a feature of every a sin of every single nation that's ever existed on the face of the earth for 20,000 years.
I agree with you. Those kinds of threats that you're describing, those kinds of problems you're describing, are the bigger problems. First of all, they're wholly inaccurate.
Yeah.
Second of all, they are specific to us, and we are the problem, not they are the problem.
So it's an anti-patriotism.
I think so. And the yes, and the part I don't understand as well as I would like, because the answer is there's probably no good answer. I don't know how much of that anti-patriotism is planned, and how much is just accidental because people just go along to get along, or they get bribed, or they get, their wife doesn't like when they say things that are unpopular at the dinner parties and stuff. I don't know how much of it is because people are or lazy or lack the courage, or it's, again, and we have NIMBYism in America is a huge problem, where it's just like it's not our problem until it is. Like we don't worry about stuff until it directly affects us and whatever. And how much of it is like, the Belt and Road Initiative unfolding, and the thing that Yuri Bezmenov talked about in 1983, like this is the Soviet Union's plan, and he walked us through for an hour and a half. Right. And what do you know? 40 years later, everything that he talked about is happening like exactly as he said. That's the part where I don't understand, is how much of it is intentional. It seems like it's a pretty large scale conspiracy to pull off. On the other hand, they're also like telling us right out in the open what they're doing, and so it's not that big of a conspiracy, because they're proudly talking about how the kids are the property of the state, not the parents, and like things like that are being said routinely now, and so I think there will become a problem. Well, historically, there's always been a problem big enough to divide us down the middle.
Yes.
And then there's a victor and there's a winner and a loser. Now, the exception has been World War II, because there was outside interference that preempted the communism fight in America that we would have seen otherwise, that was seen in other countries. Yeah. It was preempted by Pearl Harbor.
Right. Well, and so I think to your first, I want to address both those points. So to your first point, is it just what happens, or is it a grand conspiracy? I mean, I hate to use the word, but is it or what is? Well, so I think one of the things we have to look at is, whenever there's a big prize on the table, and we are the biggest economy in the world, we're the most powerful country that Earth has ever seen. So there's a huge, huge prize on the table. And so therefore, it's got to be both. It's got to be whatever power and money interests exist nationally, internationally. They gravitate towards power. They gravitate towards control, because that's how you get more power and control. So it's not a conspiracy
And,
in the
and
sense
they
that
and they alter the criteria by which success is measured
yes, exactly, in order to gain more control.
in order to gain status, control, money, power,
Money,
influence,
all of
blah
those
blah blah
things.
blah blah. Yeah,
So there's that. There's all of that, and then there's so that's obviously what people plan to do. What people with bad intentions plan to
yeah,
do. But on the flip side of that, what you have is you've got a disunited America because of lack of memory of anything. I mean, most, you got to be at least in your mid 20s to have any recollection of 9/11 at this point.
yeah,
So, let alone the Cold War or World War II or Vietnam or
yep,
Korea or any of those types of things. So then there's a lack of a uniting bad memory. And so isn't that
right,
fascinating? Do you have to have some kind of uniting bad memory, uniting principle of we're not invincible, and this great stuff that we enjoy is not ours by birthright, is not ours by the
yeah.
fact that we exist. So it's those two things together. Pair those things together.
And also I would suggest also factoring in it has to be recent enough we can't convince ourselves we've evolved past that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Because every time around, I mean, the League of Nations after
Yeah.
World War I, we've moved past
The
war.
war to end all wars, don't forget.
War to end all wars. We've proclaimed this. Obama proclaimed that a
Yeah.
while back. When the Russians invaded Crimea, well, they're just unenlightened rubes. They can't do
Yeah.
this. 21st century. We moved beyond that.
Yeah. It's severity, it's proximity,
Yes,
it's
recency. Yes,
recency as far as like being recent enough that we can't say, well, it was 50 years ago. We're smarter than that now, which is
right,
a lot of what we're saying. And I would disagree. I don't think
right,
we've evolved that much in 50 years to be able to outgrow things like greed and desire for power and corruption and all. I don't think we've made a whole lot of progress on that since
right.
1944, honestly.
Well, so if those things are all true, and they are, I mean, I think they're historically demonstrably. I don't think you can argue with it. I don't think you can call us
Right.
conspiracy theorists to say any of the things we just said. Those things all being true and have always been true. I think then you can go back through the history and say that American spirit is dormant but not dead, and
That I
it's
would agree with.
dormant
Yes.
in the majority. It's probably dormant in the majority, and it's also dormant in the majority because of how unpopular. You probably saw the recent tirade that somebody did on MSNBC about the great threat is Christian nationalism. Did you see that one?
Yes. Oh
And
yeah.
so this idea that, it's not that we have, millions of people flooding across the southern border and thousands or tens of thousands of people doing evil things that have come into this
Right.
country, or potentially doing, terrorist watch list. It's not that we've got people all around the world that are arming up and preparing for to invade our neighbors and our friends. No, it's those church going people with guns and
Patriotism.
Bibles that are
Church
patriots.
going people with patriotism. Yes, they're the
They're the
problem.
ones that are the big problem. And
Yeah.
so if patriotism, if it were dead and buried and not coming back, then you wouldn't have these people making those proclamations that want power for
Right.
themselves because they're
And
afraid of it.
and I do feel like, in this moment, which I didn't feel a year ago, I do feel like the pendulum is starting to swing the other way. People
Yeah,
are starting to say, you're going to call me names no matter what. So screw you.
right,
I might as well tell you what I think. Because
right,
if I don't go along to the letter to what I would call and you would call fringe ideas
right,
about you must allow 8-year-olds to cut off their penises, otherwise you're a
right.
bad person.
Yeah,
If you don't go along in lockstep with that stuff, you're a racist and you're a xenophobe and you're a blah blah, you're a
right,
phobophobe, you're whatever you are, right? You're all these phobes, right?
right.
Well, I think people just have gotten tired of that. Like, screw you. You're
Yeah,
gonna call me names no matter what. I might as well tell you what I think. And
right.
and by the way, inflation's going bananas, and people are coming over here to our country and doing dastardly things, even though you won't talk about it. And even if that's not happening on a large scale yet, there is a finite number of people that can live here and not have us all living just like places we don't want to live. Like if I wanted to live in Sudan, I would move to Sudan. I don't want to live like that.
Right.
And if people in Sudan want to live like us, they should do what we do.
Right.
and not like come here and just try to, elbow us out of the way. And specifically now, I think what's driving part of the change is people are seeing video of these illegal immigrants coming here, bragging about the
Yeah.
benefits they're getting, and they kind of have this screw you attitude.
Right.
And there's people who are, now inflation is bad enough and rents are high enough and wages are not gone up enough. And there's people who are beginning to experience what you experience at the tail end of these, these long bull cycles of the economy and things like that, where
Right.
things are starting to get unpleasant for enough people. Again, NIMBYism. People are starting to have personal negative outcomes.
Right.
At the same time, these illegal immigrants are like flashing the middle finger at us and mocking us for coming over and having children here. And like they get X dollars and they get free medical and they don't have to work. And people who are working 2 jobs are getting tired of that shit. And they're like, enough of it.
And I think another indicator of that is the collapse of institutional media. So because, so when the narrative is controlled by the few, the New York Times, and institutional media across the board is collapsing because people are not just submitting their brains, putting it, in the bucket of networks and of big newspapers anymore. They're all laying people off. The LA Times laid a bunch of people off. So across the board, even big tech has laid a bunch of people off. And then you've got the rise of alternative. Whenever you have alternative media, of course, people who are in the know and in power don't like that because they don't control it. And so therefore they call, guys like you and I that are podcasting or people that are commenting on X or Elon Musk or anybody else, dangerous to society. So that all to me says that they realize that I hate they, but because then
who's
then
they, as my aunt used to always say.
Who's they? It's it's the great conspiracy. The whenever that kind of tide is turning, I think that there is a resurgence in this patriotic ideal, in this ideal of we're Americans and we have a God-given, say it that way, God. So now I've just labeled myself as a Christian nationalist, I guess.
The Constitution or the Declaration of Independence says by our Creator. So
you
can default that and make it a little less religious if you want.
Yeah, that's right. So those things rising, then I think gives rise to that kind of American patriotic spirit once again.
I think that one of the things that is probably underestimated by the people, again, I agree with you 100% that a lot of this is accidental and a lot of this is planned. There's no question that there's countries who would benefit tremendously if there wasn't this beacon of light known as the United States for people to aspire to.
Right.
That raises the bar substantially for the type of lifestyle people are going to yearn for. And if we didn't have a United States, the people who live in Sudan or whatever, who have these dictators or I don't know what kind of government Sudan has, but these places that have tribalistic or dictators running the country or whatever. If there's no United States, there's nothing to say how bad their life is because there's nothing to compare it to, right? Or a much lower standard to compare it to. So getting us out of first place makes a lot of people's lives easier who want a lot of power across the globe. I do believe that that's a factor for sure. And I also believe that people here are lazy or scared or uninformed or just want to go along to get along or are bribed or corrupted. Like there's a whole myriad of things that are going along. That's just happenstance. I think all of those things are probably happening at one time, which is why I say it's too hard of a question for me to answer. The thing I think that is underestimated for you and I probably now, and people who do have this kind of will for for America to fall, is that unlike other places, the stakes are much higher for us. Nobody else has a freedom of speech written into their constitution. Nobody has that. Nobody has a real life experience where you could say, I think the president is a blankety 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 blank and not go to prison for that. And when that goes away, and it will be attempted at least.
Sure.
The stakes of that going away are much different than the Sudanese person who's going to have 3 goats instead of 4, or 1
Sure.
goat instead of 3, or whatever. It's the depth that people will go, and the reserve energy they will have to fight to retain that and give it to their children once it's realized, I think is a lot higher than the Roman soldier who was just told to go stand in the line and
Yeah.
shoot at the people, or with the sword, not shoot people, but go have the sword fight with the people because your king commanded it. Well, okay,
Right.
there's a certain level of give a shit you'll have in doing that.
Right.
That's different when you're giving up the things that you and I have experienced firsthand.
Yeah, and when you've got 200 years of history, 230, 50 years, whatever it is, of history behind you, that says that the way that we live is possible, it can happen, and
Yeah.
and there's benefits to it, and it's worth fighting for. So I
Right.
think all of that is very true, and that's why. Again, it says to me that there's a dormancy that's happening
I think that's a
right
good way of
now.
putting it. I think that's fair.
I think that's and I've sort of convinced myself of that through this conversation today. So
That's good. At least one of us is bought into that. That's perfect.
right. Well, and here's the other part of that then. So what that means, and this will be easily misinterpreted by people who want to misinterpret it. What that means is we need a good crisis. We need in order to really bring it to the fore, to regenerate the American spirit, and we're going to get it. We're going to get it.
Yeah, no, it'll be something. If it's not another pandemic or an economic crash, it'll be a war, civil war. It'll be something. And again, I agree with you. I'm not rooting for it.
No.
I'm dreadful of it more
Yeah.
and more all the time, for sure. But Neil Howe, who wrote the book The Fourth Turning and Generations, and The Fourth Turning is Here, who's done a million X times the research you and I will ever do on this topic. Like he's probably the authority on this topic,
Yes.
or one of the top 5 in the world for sure. I really appreciate the way he talks about it, which is if you're in a crummy marriage and you have to go through a divorce, at the end of that, you will likely say something like, I'm so glad I went through that because my life is so much better now. And if somebody said, would you want to do it again? Hell no, I wouldn't want to do it again.
Exactly.
But I'm so glad I went through it this time because it was necessary. My life would have been miserable without it. And if you look at over the course of 80 years-ish, again, long enough for current generations to not have memory that's recent enough, urgent enough, close enough, meaningful enough to indicate or to remind them of why these things must be avoided. All that stuff is distant memory. It's past generations. It's those rubes. We've outgrown it. It'll never happen to us. We're smarter. We're more sophisticated. We have better systems, blah, 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 blah. That coupled with the institutions that were established coming out of the last crisis have been bastardized and corrupted. And if you look at institutions now, like you and I when we first started doing this, we talked about like name an institution that's functioning well.
It'd be a short podcast.
There are none.
No.
The legal system's a joke. The education system's a joke. The pensions are all a joke. The Social Security is a joke. Like anything that was established back then is falling apart or is corrupted or bastardized or is serving different masters now. Like we had things that were put in place to serve the public, and those things are being used against the public now. And like all these things have been manipulated and corrupted and bastardized and band-aided and whatever, and they're dysfunctional. And so again, we have NIMBYism. They kick the can down the road as long as we can. And one day we can't kick it any further. And like, well, shit, now I have to deal with it. So I guess we roll up our sleeves and deal with it. That's a very American way to do things.
Well, it's also that whole process you're describing there is kind of how it works in nature as well. So in a forest, if you don't have a forest fire in a forest periodically, then nothing grows. You don't have the giant redwoods. You've had throughout nature, there's this life and death and destruction and creativity process that just spins like a wheel going on down the road. So we tend to convince ourselves that because we're so smart and because we're so advanced and we've got this technology and all this stuff, our culture and our society is going to just be on this constant upward path. But the
Right.
reality of it is that it's growth. It's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, over and over and over again. That's how we
Now, like
advance.
Tony Robbins, who's a famous guy now, I've seen him on TV, and he's got a new book he's promoting, whatever. He talks about the seasons.
Yeah.
You can't be in spring and summer all the time.
Yeah.
That's not how it works. So there's a fall and a winter too. And people talk, there's famous, cliche quotes that are, you can't appreciate the good times if you don't go through the bad times. And if you don't ever have to draw upon, the energy and the will to get through the hard times, how would you have any measure for how good you are? There's all kinds of things that talk about this in life and in nature, in marriages, in households, in families. Like, this is the human experience. This is what it is. And go ahead.
And I think that also then to our topic today of like, is the American spirit dead? Is patriotism dead? All of that. I think that goes to that as well. I think it goes to,
for sure.
if there is something good and if there's a stream of strength in the American spirit that's caused us to be where we're at now. The proposition that I would put forth to, and I've done this a lot in debates, is that it's that spirit, that the American spirit that's caused us to be the greatest economy, greatest military, greatest, inventor of things that's ever existed on the earth. If that is the case, if that spirit is the thing that's and by that I mean, all of the things the founders identified, what Lincoln's talking about, et cetera, even what Charlie Daniels is talking about, if those are the things, that kind of underlying spirit that's really the strength of what's created a great nation, then the creative destruction that challenges that spirit is necessary for it to become greater still, or better than it has.
And here's where you are probably a little more optimistic than me. And here's how: like, if you were alive in 1928, there was no way you could imagine what this country looked like in 1948. There's just no way. It was mechanized on a scale that you probably couldn't wrap your head around.
Right.
Okay, go back to the prior time. If you were alive in 1852, you can't imagine what it would look like in 1876. It was a different kind of country. Now we lose sight of that because the increments of growth back then were smaller than what we see now. Technology is going ever faster, et cetera. So I had no doubt that you and I will not be able to predict what our country will look like in 20 years. It'll be off the charts more technologically advanced and evolved in ways that you and I will not even be able to put our finger on. I believe that 100%. I also know that looking at places like China, when they went through their cultural revolution, they just stopped talking about the things that they didn't like. And so I agree that there will be a perception of a renewed American spirit. I am fully in belief of that.
Yeah.
Whether or not that American spirit will represent what you and I call American spirit today, that part I'm very suspect about, because China has nationalism and patriotism, they might call it, whatever their word for that is, off the charts today, that in no way represents what people were patriotic about China in 1952.
Right.
It's just the criteria by which they determine what is patriotism couldn't be more different. But they have a, they're very proud to be Chinese, just for different reasons. So I think that the American spirit people will be very proud of that, but it's certainly possible that the values you and I have will be squashed, and the American spirit that they celebrate is by defeating idiots like me and you.
It's possible. However, I think that this goes back to something we've talked about in previous shows, and that is that reality always wins. And so if you take a look, for instance, at the false beliefs that in Mao's time, in Chairman Mao's time, that permeated and held them back, they had to adopt some of our. Now, they didn't adopt all of them because obviously they're a dictatorship right now, but they had to adopt certain, free market or freer market kinds of principles. So if the things that caused America to be great were certain principles of freedom and individuality and ultimately a country that allows for personal growth. If that's indeed the case, then it's likely that we would return to those pieces once again. So, because again, reality always wins. And they're finding that now, that in China in particular, the government has a significant problem on their hands because they've intervened in the economy in ways that just don't work. So then the question is, what's this new form of patriotism that will emerge look like? And I agree with you that it's probably not a carbon copy of what we know and what we've experienced. So, in the book we've been talking about, Neil Howe talks about this idea of a second, a third, a fourth American republic that emerged out of the crisis era.
Right.
So in each time, what emerged out of that was not the same thing. It's not just a rehash of the same thing. So I think what will emerge out of that is going to be different than perhaps we've experienced. But here's the other part of that what gives me hope about that, as I said a few minutes ago, was that reality always wins. So the success principles that creates a longer term workable environment do assert themselves. So, you might call it social Darwinism or something. It's not probably exactly that, but the idea of survival of the fittest. So there's certain aspects of patriotism that cause success to happen and have throughout all of American history. Now, the actual expression of those things changed from 1776 to 1852 to 1928. So some of those things have changed, but there's a constant thread of those things that it just works. It's just stuff that works and has caused that expansion to be upward and to the right, even if the kind of the form of it looks a little bit different. So for that reason, I don't think that it's likely. Now, I don't foreclose the possibility that it could be. I could be wrong about this, but I don't think it's likely that we end up with the unity of the of the communist, regime. I think it is completely possible that we do end up with an empire. I mean, we've got a functional empire. Functionally speaking, right now we have an empire. I mean, we're everywhere in the world. We're multiple times the military strength of anybody else that exists in the world, even China, although they're up and coming to be sure. So, but we do have a hegemony, a hegemonic empire, even if we don't have an emperor, even if we have our political system. So, but we could have a patriotic empire in this next go around that maintains a number of the principles of freedom that exist now. So, and I don't want an empire. I want us to remain a republic. But Rome spent most of its existence as an empire and not a republic. So it's possible that we end up in that same way too.
Yeah, I think there's I'm certainly pulling for us to emerge from this with, flags waving and you and I saying, well, it really sucked a lot, but we've grown some way. We're better because of it. Of course, that's what I'm hoping for. There's no question that would be my aim for sure.
Right.
There's two things that worry me though. One is technology. Technology is moving, at a much faster pace than our capabilities. And
For
it's
sure.
not inconceivable to me to imagine a world where 1,000 people had access to enough technology to keep the rest of the population of the 8 billion people at bay. That's not like a stretch for me by any stretch.
Sure.
The other thing that I keep reminding myself of, unfortunately, is the United States of America is the anomaly in history.
That's true. Yeah.
We are less than 1%. If you look at all the lives lived and put them all and mash them all together, whatever the math is, 1%, 3%, 5%, 0.5%, whatever it is,
Small.
a very small, infinitesimal percentage of the overall lived experience on this planet has enjoyed the kind of freedom that we have in our short
Yeah.
250
It's
years.
true. Yeah.
We are the anomaly. We are not the norm. And
It's true.
so when I mash those two things together, I say, well, I agree with you, Dave. I would love to imagine that patriotism will emerge from that, and we are the tip of the spear of what will be for generations and thousands of years
Yeah.
to follow us. It's not enough length of time to give me that kind of confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And absolutely my aspiration is not one that is I can in any way guarantee because everything you said is just now is absolutely true.
Right.
The question is whether the advances of this way of doing a country, to Lincoln's quote, can it long endure?
Right.
Are the advances substantial enough that they endure from just a sheer this works kind of scenario?
Yeah.
Because I do the operating system of the universe. The things that work best in the operating system of the universe are the things that will ultimately long endure. Now, it's also possible in the grand scope of things. So the Soviet Union was, in historically speaking, a very bad idea, but it's a very bad idea that persisted for 70 years.
Right.
So, bad ideas, unfortunately, there's a principle in business, well, if you're going to fail fast, right?
Right. Yeah.
The things we want to do in life, if they're horrible ideas, we hope they pass very quickly and we can move on to the good stuff. The unfortunately, that doesn't always work. In fact, it rarely works in large, national things. Failure tends to be slow
100%.
and then disastrous.
100%. I could totally see a scenario where, again, the guys who think like you and I are kind of mitigated, we'll say, to
Yeah.
put it nicely.
It's
And
neutralized.
then the next American, what's Neil how call it, the kind of
The next republic, the new American Republic.
American Republic
Yeah.
is one that is more socialist and is more communist. And then at the next crisis after that, they go, this really sucked. We should go back to what we had before. And I could totally see that happening.
Yeah.
I think 4,000 years from now, there'll be, what we had now will be much more the model than what, communist China has or Stalin's Russia. I am that kind of optimism in the long term. In the short term, I'm a little more skeptical. Not that I'm hoping for bad things. That's why you and I have talked about this. We're reluctant to talk about this stuff because it sounds like we're rooting for this bad stuff to happen.
Right.
That's absolutely not the case.
No.
But I also don't want to be, have my head in the sand and pretend like it's going to just wash over us and we're somehow going to be immune, because history has said that that's not how it works.
Right. You have to hope for the best and prepare for the worst.
Prepare for the
and
worst.
That's
100%.
just, risk. You gotta manage your risk, whether it's your money or your country. And that's just the reality of a smart plan.
Yeah. Well, and I hope that that's what comes through as you and I talk about this for Kenny G and for people, our contemporaries, listen, is that in no way am I hoping for any of this stuff. I wish we would go back overnight to 1998 and how things were then, or when Charlie Daniels was in 2006, how things were fantastic. There was a patriotism off the charts still, especially relative to today in 2006, because 9/11 was fresh in our minds, and we did unify in large cases. Again, there's always exceptions, blah blah blah, but by and large, we were as unified as I had ever seen us, for sure. And I would love to go back to that tomorrow and get rid of all this stuff that we're seeing. The universe doesn't seem to care about my opinion on that. So
I've experienced that too. So
I'm gonna launch a formal grievance about that, and there's going to be an investigation, and there will be consequences and repercussions at some point. But
all right,
today, that's not how it is.
Yeah, let me know how that goes for you.
All right. Well, hey, that's a good place to wrap it up. As we always say, hope for the best and plan for the worst, right?
Yep.
Don't forget, you can go check us out at unsilentpodcast.com. A great place to leave a comment if you want to tell us how we got it right, of course, or if you somehow want to tell us we got it wrong, that's okay too. There's a great place to leave a comment on Rumble. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty, so hopefully that didn't ruin it too much for you, and you're able to get through that. So we have We're at the mercy of technology like everybody else, right, Dave?
That's exactly right.
Anyhow, that's it for Dave and Brian, and we'll talk to y'all next week.
See you next week.
Do you want to be Unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.